and it is really timely and interesting topic. Should all recreational drugs be legalized? Both Mark and Lenny are board members of the Palm Beach County chapter of the ACLU of Florida. I don't know which are going first. I guess I guess it's phrased in should they be legalized, so maybe Mark goes first, but I'll leave it up to them.
Michael, can you share the screen with me?
Yeah.
That is maybe a co-host.
Oh, David, would you do that? Oh, Audrey, you made it on. Good.
It is. I
Yeah, I
finally
was
found
just
this.
okay. David?
Where is he? David's right there.
He's muted.
David.
Okay, yeah, you should be able to share now.
Okay.
Oh. Hi, Joan.
Can you all see?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So let me see if I can move this over just a little bit, and I'll start up this.
Kick me up. What happened?
Okay. So we're going to debate the issue of whether recreational drugs should be legalized. And I'm going to kind of be the person who says yes. Lenny's going to say no. And I'm going to present, in a sense, 3/4 of the yes side or all of the yes side. And Lenny is going to give the no side kind of as a running commentary on my presentation. So the first thing I wanted to say is that ACLU policy is for drug legalization. And from policy 214A, it says the ACLU advocates full and complete decriminalization of the use, possession, manufacture, and distribution of drugs. And essentially that means not decriminalization, which is what we have in Portugal today, and which Oregon is proposing, but actual legalization. So the ACLU is fine with the state regulating the sale and distribution of drugs and taxing it, which would make it legal rather than simply decriminalized. So I'm going to say that the ACLU is really for legalization. And I want to stress that ACLU members don't have to agree with ACLU policies, and in this case, Lenny doesn't. So we're going to start out by saying that you could oppose drug legalization for many reasons. You could have moral or religious objections, for instance, but when we think about public policy in a non-moralistic or non-religious sense, almost everybody agrees that we should hew to the notion of harm reduction as our way of estimating whether it would be good or bad to legalize drugs. If the harm to people in society is going to increase by legalizing drugs, then we wouldn't want to do it. If it could be decreased, then perhaps we do want to do it. So, you know, our Lenny and I both agree that we're interested in harm reduction, and our assessments of the harm differ a little bit. And I just want to stress that some harms can be reduced while drugs remain illegal. For instance, sharing needles tends to spread HIV and hepatitis and other diseases. And you can create needle exchange programs where addicts are given a fresh syringe each day after they turn in their old one, and encouraged not to use them with other users. And that can be done without legalizing drugs at all, so that there are certain ways of reducing the current harms that people experience, even while keeping drugs illegal. But others can't. For instance, I would argue, and I'll let Lenny chime in here, but I would argue that most overdose deaths from depressants like heroin result from the user's ignorance of what dose they're giving themselves. And that ignorance is caused by the non-legal distribution system. We could have medical grade marijuana, that's pretty good. Medical grade heroin available to people, and they could know the precise doses that they're giving themselves. And here I'll just point out that the main detrimental effect of heroin use by those people who are able to control their usage and not have to continue increasing it, not looking for a really kind of knock themselves down high. The main harm from that is constipation. Lenny.
Yeah, with respect to the harm reduction, I basically agree with Mark that that's a reasonable approach to take to make the assessment. I do think, however, that in looking at the harm, you need to look not only at the harm to the individual user, but to harm to third parties as well, so-called externalities. So for example, it's not just the user who potentially is affected by taking methamphetamine or heroin, for example. It's his or her family who he or she no longer can support because she or he has become an addict. It's the people on the highway who get killed as a result of the person losing all perspective and thinking that they're invulnerable and driving like crazy. And there's also harm to society as well, as you have more and more people become addicted, and now you've got to treat them, and who's going to be paying for the treatment? I think in many cases it's taxpayers, other people on insurance policies, so it's not going to be there are externalities that are imposed on third parties as a result of people getting addicted to things like heroin and meth, among others. I would also, I'm going to get into this more later, but heroin, to cite one example, has got tremendously more adverse consequences than constipation. It's serious effects to the brain and the like, and tremendously bad physical effects of methamphetamine, but I'll get into that later.
Thank you, Lenny. So let me just suggest that when we think about the harms that drugs and drug addiction cause, certainly the greatest harm is caused by the conveyor of nicotine as a drug, which is tobacco. And currently we're experiencing about 400,000 deaths per year as a result of nicotine addiction. And nicotine, I understand, is the most addictive of the drugs. And legal alcohol consumption. So we have two legal drugs here. Legal alcohol consumption leads to cirrhosis, a number of DUI deaths. It contributes to spousal abuse and many violent crimes. Almost half of violent crimes seem to be committed by people who are intoxicated with alcohol. So we have two legal drugs that cause tremendous damage, and yet society has accommodated itself to the damage that those drugs cause, even though it's severe. The abuse of pharmaceutical pain relievers causes about 40,000 overdose deaths per year. And we recently had a tremendous spike in these deaths. And we know that one pharmaceutical company is in big trouble over pushing these. And those are, first of all, some of them are legally prescribed, and then people get addicted through their legal prescriptions and seek out non-legal means of getting these drugs. Injecting heroin yields numerous overdose deaths, and it spreads HIV and hepatitis. Again, this is something that we could deal with needle exchange programs and known dosages of heroin, I think. I think most everybody agrees that, in a sense, the most debilitating of the drugs is methamphetamine. People who are addicts suffer all sorts of consequences, which are irreversible in many respects. And methamphetamine is now the top drug being trafficked from Mexico, as opposed to, say, heroin or marijuana. We face thefts to support drug habits, and that raises our crime rate. And then addicts suffer terribly in their communities when they have reputational collapse, job loss, and often, as Lenny suggested, they deeply harm their families and friends. So nobody is going to say that drugs aren't harmful. And the question is how to reduce this harm. Lenny, do you want to comment here?
Yeah, I have a few comments. One, with respect to heroin, as I mentioned earlier, it produces significant damage to the brain, as well as physical dependence. In fact, in many cases, long-term irreversible damage to the brain. And you also have to factor in that if you legalize the drugs, then potentially they're available to minors as well. And in fact, as Mark cited, the instance of Portugal, decriminalizing all possession and use of small amounts of drugs, it has seen an increase in drug usage, although deaths from overdoses have declined. As Mark mentioned, methamphetamine produces tremendously adverse consequences, including paranoia, delusions, hallucinations, psychotic episodes, some of which go away when you stop taking them, but others, people have long-term effects from them, as well as the damage caused by withdrawal. I would also note, Mark talked about the fact that we allow alcohol and tobacco, and therefore it's fine and dandy to allow everything else under the sun. I guess by the same token, if we allow the possession of handguns, then why don't we allow people to have machine guns, or for that matter, why don't we allow people to have bombs? Because after all, we do allow handgun usage. So it seems to me that because we have some policies that aren't going to be reversed doesn't mean we should make the situation worse. I would add that it's important to distinguish between legalization and decriminalization. The ACLU is advocating for legalization of both use, possession, and sale and distribution, which goes beyond even countries like Portugal, which are held out as an example. Portugal says you can have, as I mentioned, you can possess or use small amounts of drugs. It only decriminalizes it. It doesn't legalize it, and that's a distinction. For example, in Portugal, civil penalties are imposed, and people are encouraged to get treatment. And in fact, a lot of Portugal's improvements in terms of reduction of overdoses and some of the associated problems with addiction have come about because it has encouraged people to get treatment. That can come about by decriminalizing use of at least some drugs, but legalization is going to only encourage people, especially youngsters, to use more and get addicted more, and therefore cause even more problems of trying to get them unaddicted. Take it away.
So let's go on now to talk about some of the harms that are caused by making drugs illegal. We have, in the US, we've roughly doubled our prison population by putting people in jail who deal in drugs. with further harm to their families. This contributes to racial inequality because it's most frequently the minority dealers who are arrested because they tend to be street dealers, whereas white dealers have better networks and are not street dealers, and they don't get arrested as often. So this contributes to racial inequality in our society. And I've already mentioned that we have the problem with people, particularly now that China is, it's easy, relatively easy to get fentanyl and carfentanil from China. As soon as people learn that there is a really heavy carfentanil or fentanyl heroin on the market, they rush to get it because they know that they're going to get a really, really heavy duty high from it. And the consequence of that is that many people OD. And again, if we had this regulated and people had known dosages, they would be able to avoid that. I've talked about needle sharing problems, but let's go on to some more interesting ones. The drug trade tends to corrupt police because they find that they can easily arrest people who have dissed them or whom they suspect of other crimes by planting drugs on them. So they do that, and there was a famous case in Chicago recently where a police narcotics squad terrorized tenements in Chicago for about 12 years, I think, with the residents constantly complaining that the police were planting drugs. And this went on successfully for 12 or maybe more than 12 years before somebody finally got the goods on them. And that whole group of about 12 police who were both planting drugs and also confiscating and selling them were finally arrested and imprisoned. So there's a major temptation to corruption in our police forces that comes from enforcement of drug laws. The illegalization of drugs means that the bad guys, so to speak, become outlaws, and they deal with one another with violent means when they are trying to secure turfs to deal drugs in. And as we recognize both from the United States, but particularly from Mexico, there has been staggering carnage as a result of this. At least 40,000 people have lost their lives in Mexico. And I believe the murder rate now is about 10,000 a year, at least 10,000 a year associated with drug dealing in Mexico. The profits that these dealers in foreign countries that are either growing or shipping drugs, the enormous profits to them has allowed them to destabilize and corrupt the governments in producing and trafficking countries. We know the consequences of this because they're now, as we speak, flooding to our southern border as children who have been terrorized by drug gangs in Central America. Their parents are seeing no recourse but to send them alone to the United States to seek asylum, because they know that they will be killed if they don't join drug gangs in Central America. So that's a significant externality. Lenny mentioned externalities. This is a cost that we don't normally take into account when we're buying drugs, but this is a cost that is associated with them. And then finally, this is a good source of taxation. And I'll talk more about what we should use with tax monies that we might gain from selling currently illegal drugs. But this would be a good source of revenue for US states and the federal government. Lenny.
Yeah, a couple of points. One, in terms of distinguishing between decriminalization and legalization, I agree with Mark to a certain extent that by criminalizing everything, including marijuana possession, you end up stigmatizing people who then have difficulties getting jobs, and that causes tremendous harm to them and to their families. But on the other hand, you can decriminalize it, treat it like a traffic fine, for example, impose a civil penalty, but don't make it a quote crime for possession of at least some soft drugs like marijuana. On the other hand, if you are going to legalize methamphetamine distribution and sale, what you are going to do is you're going to have even more efforts by narco-terrorist gangs from God knows where to sell even more of the poison that's polluting the streets. And in fact, when Portugal decriminalized, not legalized, but just decriminalized drug possession, not sale and distribution, it saw a tremendous uptick in both the sale and distribution of drugs, including hard drugs. So I think that's a serious danger. The other point that I wanted to get into, and I guess this one we'll talk about some more, is that to reduce some of the harms that are caused by drugs, getting people treatment is probably the best approach. And in fact, in Portugal, which did see a reduction in overdoses, they had a tremendous increase in funding for treatment. And it seems to me that is a better approach than criminalizing possession of some of these recreational drugs. But of course, you have to have the willingness to fund these programs as well.
Thanks, Lenny. So I'm going to admit that legalization would increase the number of users. I'm not sure how much it would, but it would, certainly. And depending upon the drug, between 10 and 25% of users become problem users or addicts. And later on, I'm going to give you a little interesting data about alcohol, but some drugs people are able to deal with without becoming addicted. Most people, 9 out of 10. I think that's probably true of heroin. Others, like methamphetamine, seem to be more destructive and gather in about a quarter of the people who try them out and use them with some degree of regularity. About a quarter of those people become users, regular users, or addicts, or problem users, binge users. So granted that I'm going to confess that I think we're going to have more users and therefore more problem users or addicts, we've got to figure out how we weigh the damage of increased addiction, say in physical or reputational harm and harm to families, et cetera, versus the benefits of fewer prisoners, fewer OD deaths, et cetera. And there just isn't any easy way. There's no metric that we can use to commensurate across these different phenomena. What is the value of the life of a Honduran child who is trying to escape to our borders to get asylum versus the harm done to a person who has an overdose death? I don't know how to weigh those. I don't know how to weigh the gravity of a child being forced to flee for its safety to the United States versus the reputational harm that somebody suffers when he or she becomes known as unreliable because of addiction. It's just very hard to commensurate those things. So there's no easy way to gather all these things together and say, here's a number. You know, if we legalize drugs, we would have X% less harm, because the harms are not commensurable. And because no nation has tried this yet, though Portugal and Oregon are decriminalizing, we can't securely predict the consequences. Now, my reading is that Portugal has not seen a terrific increase in drug use. And so Lenny and I would have to argue that out with statistics later on. between ourselves, not here. But this may be simply because most citizens there, because it's still stigmatized and hard to get a hold of drugs, it may be just because citizens don't know about them and their availability. And were they available from the corner store or something like Trulieve down by Home Depot, then there might be a lot more use and a lot more addiction. Lenny?
Yeah, I think that the harm caused by the addiction, I think we may be understating the degree to which the addiction causes harm. People end up getting addicted and basically their mindset is, I just need to get my next fix. I need to get more and more and more. They end up losing their job as their focus turns exclusively toward getting more and more of whatever it is to keep them high. As a result, they end up losing their jobs, losing their income, losing their families. And of course, you've got not just the user, but the user's family suffering the psychological consequences, as well as the loss of income, as well as society having to help subsidize the person who's lost their income, unless we want to let them starve on the streets. And then we also have to deal with the problem of paying for treatment. One time I was on a reservation up in South Dakota, where there was they just had built a casino, and right next to the casino was an addiction treatment center. And I think it's fair to say that if we legalize everything under the sun, you are going to see a lot more users, a lot more addicts, and a lot of the consequences flowing from addiction is going to produce tremendous amount of problems. And frankly, I haven't seen the United States in terms of our healthcare system treating everybody. We have a lot of people who fall through the cracks, and particularly when you come to things other of a psychological nature that are not covered under many plans. Now you're talking about, are the plans going to cover drug treatments? Is Medicaid, Medicare, Obamacare going to cover drug treatments? And how much is that going to cost? I think that's a significant item. With respect to Portugal, in terms of drug increase, I think statistics show that initially there was a significant increase in drug usage, but subsequently that use leveled off. And so I don't know whether you can call it a long-term increase, but there was a significant bump initially.
Okay, thanks, Lenny. Lenny, I want to make a comment that I haven't made in this talk before, and that's that when you think about what happened with crack cocaine in the United States, people got addicted to crack and it wasted a whole bunch of lives, but it also had an educational impact on the community of users and people in the communities that were using, such that usage of crack cocaine really tapered off after people realized the damage it would do. So I'm wondering whether we couldn't actually anticipate that after an initial binging on drugs once they were legalized, when people saw the damage that was done, they might realize that unrestrained use could be very damaging to them, and learn to moderate their use in the same way that some drinkers use alcohol in a moderate way. But I'm going to admit, yes, go ahead, Lenny.
Yeah, that may be true with respect to some users of crack cocaine. However, with respect to methamphetamine, telling a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old what the consequences are of using it and how it's going to produce harm in the future, I think you're going to have significant problems with kids and young adults getting addicted to stuff and the ensuing harm that results from causes.
I agree with you, Lenny, but it was the kids of the crack addicts who decided to swear off it, because they saw the damage. They went to their grandparents to live, and they saw that the damage that it did to their parents. And so they swore off it, more or less. So
And now we're going to have a new generation of crackheads once we legalize it.
Well, we
Or
might
event.
have a generation, you're right. And then people might learn to be more responsible users. So I'm going to admit that legalization would be really bad public policy unless, and here are a whole bunch of things to think about. First of all, we would need to price drugs so as to raise the sort of tax revenues that we would need to support treatment, and price them in a way that does that, but also suppresses the black market for drugs. If you price legal drugs too high, the illegal market will continue. And I think they're having this problem in California right now. Finding the sweet spot here isn't really easy, and this would take some experimentation. And I'm going to admit that unless enough tax revenues are dedicated to treatment, then this doesn't make any sense, because there's going to be a lot of wastage of people and they're going to need a lot of treatment. So that we would have to, before we did this, we would have to use the public health system, which is decrepit in the United States, as we've all learned from the pandemic. We would have to really pump up the public health system to have treatment ready before we did this. And we would have to be able to employ people who are currently in the drug trade. I don't know how many people that is, but certainly they have learned some skills, but these may not be ones that will get them jobs in the regular economy. So we would need job training programs and work guarantees for these people, because we can't just set up a legal market which takes away their livelihood and then do nothing for them. And I'm going to agree that we would have to work very hard to protect minors from the ill effects of drugs. Even marijuana has been shown to have ill effects on young people before their brains are fully formed. And this is no easy task. And I was going to say that minors, when I originally thought about doing this, I was going to say, minors find it easily to get marijuana or oxycodone than they do alcohol, but I did a little research into this and it's actually not the case, but the differences are small. They're able to get all of these relatively easily now. And what we would need to generate is a way of trying to reduce their access to these drugs, which could be damaging to them more so than they are to adults. And we would have to make sure that we would allocate foreign aid to help repair the externality of what we've done to countries in Central and Latin America to so damage them, because without repairing the damage that our drug habits have caused, we would be irresponsible world citizens. So I thought you might be amused to know, and this is kind of interesting, that the top 20% of alcohol drinkers account for 4 out of 5 drinks sold. And when we say drinks sold, we don't mean it like in bars. We mean buying at Total Wine as well. And the industry actually benefits from the abusers, the people who drink too much, because they account for so much of what is bought and used in the alcohol industry. And it would be disconcerting, I think, to find out that the same would be true of all other drugs that we legalized, because that means that industry has an incentive to coax people into drinking more and making it more readily available, because it's the abusers, in a sense, who account for most of their profits. And if that's true, it's going to be unfortunate. And we'd have to find some way to try to deal with that problem. So, Lenny, do you want to say anything about these comments?
I just briefly want to point out that with respect to tobacco cigarettes, that tobacco industry has apparently made it a point to try to do whatever they can to get youngsters hooked on it early. because that's where they see their profits. And once people get addicted to tobacco, it's really difficult to get unaddicted. And certainly by legalizing all kinds of drugs, you end up enticing minors into it, and I think that's a real risk. The other point that I wanted to make is I don't know, maybe it's a cultural one, is that in countries in Europe, Portugal, Germany, the Netherlands, where they have had some amount of decriminalization of some drugs, in Portugal all drugs, in Netherlands soft drugs, and that they have a significantly difference in terms of public health. Everybody can get treated, unlike this country. And there's also differences in terms of people's willingness to get treated. I mean, here the pandemic has shown that people are not willing to get vaccines, not willing to wear masks, and we've got a healthcare system that doesn't cover everybody. So I think that introducing legalization is going to produce problems here that are significantly worse than in other countries that have different healthcare systems and different cultures. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Lenny. That's kind of the end of our presentation, but I wanted to say that, you know, when I think about this and try to weigh these things, my overall estimate is that, considering the gross harm that's done, that legalization would reduce the gross harm. And in my personal estimation, it's the harm we're doing to people in other countries that is as serious as the harm that we would do to people who would use drugs here if they were legalized. The harm from making drugs illegal that we do to other countries actually outweighs for me the harm that would come to us from legalizing drugs in the United States. And I think, as kind of a responsible world citizen, I know there are people who would consider that very term anathema, that we have a great shame and burden to bear for the externality that we have caused in corrupting and terrorizing countries in Central and Latin America, Afghanistan, Turkey, etc., in order to feed our drug habits. And that alone would cause me to say that we ought to be willing to bear the burden of the damage that we would cause to our own society were we to legalize drugs, if we could make sure that we had every effort in place to minimize that damage once it were to begin. Lenny,
in rebuttal to that, I would say that legalizing drugs in the United States is not going to get rid of the drug industry in Mexico, Latin America, and South America. If we say that that marijuana X is legal here, or that methamphetamine, if regulated, is legal, they'll make it stronger. They'll lace it with God knows what. They'll make it cheaper. There'll still be an incentive to produce stuff in Latin America and South America to feed an ever-growing appetite that we've now wedded in this country.
Okay, so we hope that this would be a cause for discussion. So we presented our points of view, and we're now inviting everybody to chime in and let us know what they think.
Well, I think the biggest sticking point was what Lenny said, and I saw that interestingly. Someone forwarded me an article from the 80s, I think, from the Manhattan, someone writing for the Manhattan Institute. And I was prepared based on the fact that it was coming from the Manhattan Institute to immediately discount it. And I did much of what was said, but the issue of the effects on the family, you know, of the user is, I don't know that it's enough to tip the scale for me, but it's something that I mean, I guess you have the same thing with alcoholics, you know, what alcoholics do to families, and that's a legal drug. So David, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I actually was taking notes. I don't know if I can read them. First, we have to start by understanding that there's no perfect solution, but we'd have it already. Right? Any solution is going to have problems. Unfortunately, the right to pursuit of happiness didn't make it from the Declaration into the Constitution, so we don't actually have a right to happiness. That said, we are supposed to be a free country, and unless something causes tremendous harm, I should be able to do it. This is, of course, nonsense, but nonetheless, we have to pass that along. We also have to be careful of, I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg talking about the horrors, where, oh God, if we allow this, you know, then we're gonna have to do this. No, if we allow this, then we take things one step at a time. And the idea of, well, if we legalize drugs, we're gonna have people driving, you know, high all the time. First of all, they already are. Secondly, we're not making it legal to drive while high. And so there's this implication that, well, you know, people lose their mind and drive high. Not quite true. As a case in fact, it is dangerous to drive while intoxicated on anything, and thus try to avoid it. There's also a certain bit about something being illegal that is very beguiling to youngsters, right? In my case, I skipped right past cigarettes and alcohol because they were legal, and who wanted to bother with that? I want to do the thing that was illegal, smoking pot. So the very fact that something is illegal makes it the golden calf. Did I just cross metaphors? I did something wrong. But that's the idea there. I want to make it perfectly clear that I'm only talking about recreational drugs. I am not in favor of legalizing antibiotics, that kind of thing, right? We are talking, we didn't mention LSD, we didn't mention Molly, ecstasy, any of the new designer things, which kind of always punch a little hole in my idea of, yes, I've always been in favor of legalizing drugs. To a certain extent, it's decriminalizing and not legalizing that continues to cause problems in other countries because we can't manufacture them reasonably with quality control that people would be able to buy. So yes, they would still put fentanyl and heroin and all kinds of things. I want to throw in one last thing that I came up with many, many years ago. There was an article that listed that in the paper that talked about Winston and Marlboro, and that they had been two very similar cigarettes from different brands, and they had the same sort of market share. Suddenly, the market share of Marlboro took off over Winston, and it turned out that what had happened was scientists had discovered that they could extract the nicotine, treat it with a base of some kind, to create free nicotine, which was more easily smoked and absorbed, and put it back into Marlboro cigarettes. And that shifted the balance. People started noticing that Marlboro's got them higher than Winston did. And as I read that article, which had to be 30 years ago, it's almost like one of those cartoons where the light goes on in your head. And I'm like, that's where they got freebase from. That's where they got the cocaine freebase. Some scientists said, well, you can do it with nicotine. I bet you can do it with cocaine.
Mhm.
And they duplicated the process and they created freebase and probably crack, since I don't really know the difference, even though I've probably done both. So that was just, okay, I don't know that. All I did was read that article on Marlboro Winston, and I said, that's where crack came from. Anyway, thank you. My own,
You're funny.
all the notes.
More.
Marlene, go ahead.
Back in the early 80s, when I was in Berkeley at the university, I got a degree in public health. And so it's many, many years ago, but I remember how the money thing between use, what it costs through cigarette smoking and what it costs through alcohol, the loss through actuary projections was staggering. It was unbelievable. I wanted to say $1 billion. I can't recall, but it was to have something so legal and so pernicious, and the cost to society and to families was far beyond anything. The other thing, I was also teaching in the South Bronx in a junior high school. And 3 times I rushed kids from overdose from heroin, which was very badly cut. This was the worst ghetto in the United States, according to the New York Times at the time, in homicides, thefts, and fires. So my point is that you can get whatever you want. The kids can get it. So that I find was a weak argument. The other thought I had too is with the private prison industry, how much money, if you didn't treat drug as criminalization, if you didn't have that many prisoners for having carried paraphernalia, and you know what I mean, how much money that could be used in other ways for treatment, not for profits for private prisons. And then the other thing is, how do we bend the arc of history toward a decency, which is, and I feel strongly with Mark, on the responsibility to the globe, to Southeast Asia, to Central America. I was married to a man from Culiacan, and I didn't realize right before then there was gun shooting drug capital of Mexico back in the 80s. He was not a dealer or a user. But yes, like Ginsburg said, like RBG said, as the problems unfold, as they get revealed, we deal with them if we're smart and moral and compassionate. But to start turning the arc of history towards the moral betterment with responsibility is the way to go.
Anybody else? I'll tell in terms of legal versus illegal. I don't know how many people remember the Brown and Williamson case against 60 Minutes back in the 90s with the insider, and it was interesting because it was actually the right-wingish Wall Street Journal that allowed that to the public to be aware of what was going on, when the left-wing 60 Minutes basically caved. They were threatened with a lawsuit that if they interviewed, Jeffrey Wiggins was his name, the insider, if they interviewed him, that it would be intentional interference with contractual rights, because he had signed an agreement, a settlement agreement, when Brown and Williamson fired him. And if he spoke on 60 Minutes, the network would be guilty of having induced him to breach his agreement, and of course say things that Brown and Williamson did not want to be said publicly. Well, what happened was he was deposed in a lawsuit that was brought in Mississippi by their attorney general, who had the recognizable name, but not the same as the director, of course, of Michael Moore. And he was deposed, and the deposition was available publicly on the website of, I don't know if it was, I guess there was a website then. And the Wall Street Journal published the whole thing. So they, in a sense, scooped 60 Minutes because there was all of the information. But then 60 Minutes felt comfortable finally having their episode with Jeffrey Wigand testifying or speaking about what the tobacco company had been doing to try to addict people. And they had, of course, the tobacco company there to offer rebuttals. But Michael Moore said at one point to whoever the host of 60 Minutes was, he said, you know, I've prosecuted cocaine dealers, and these people are worse. And 60 Minutes cuts to the executive for Brown and Williamson, and he said, well, you know, cocaine is illegal. So I turned to my wife at that time, and I said, well, is he asking to make tobacco illegal? Because, you know, as Mark said, tobacco kills an awful lot of people. You know, and you know, if something has to be illegal, I'd rather see that be illegal than recreational drugs. But that's just my 2 cents.
Michael,
Yes.
we're still having a problem in getting medical marijuana approved, and the bill right now in Tallahassee to reduce the THC in medical marijuana may actually be passed. So we are so far away from legalizing, you know, hard drugs. We just have to try medical marijuana approved to help people that are suffering right now.
Yeah, in fact, I was wondering in terms of, you know, 2022 and Nikki Fried. I know that, you know, a lot of young people helped get her elected when the whole rest of the Democratic ticket, you know, lost in 2018. And I was wondering just how much that could contribute if she were running against DeSantis.
So let me remind Joan that there's variation from state to state in this regard, because Oregon has gone for legalization. And, you know, we're more and more encouraged, I think, to move to states that agree with us in terms of their public policies. And unfortunately, Florida, which is in many respects a great place to live,
Yeah.
suffers from the problem of an extraordinarily regressive political culture. So, you know, everything that citizens want that doesn't accord with what the Republican Party wants or Christian nationalists want is impossible to achieve in Tallahassee.
Yeah.
A marketing tool.
Democrats have won here before.
What?
Democrats have won here before.
It's
It's
been
gonna
20 years.
Okay, we
It'll
can
be
do it.
tough if people can't vote.
You can do it. I hear DeSantis is speeding up restoration of rights. That's almost a joke.
Oh, hi, Kathy.
I thought that was a misprint. I saw that today. William Freeman sent it to me. Duh.
The-
Wait, what was that from Borowitz or the?
No, that was real. That was real. They're streamlining the process of what is the word? Restoring rights.
Yeah, restoration of rights.
Apparently, you don't necessarily now have to show up in person
And wait 5 years to get an appointment.
No, I think you still have to wait 5 years. I think you just don't have to show up in person. No, I don't know. It was some incremental, very minorly incremental step in moving things forward.
Hmm.
I think you have to be a Republican.
So,
Oh,
all right, any other comments? Or is everyone?
Shall I prepare a straw poll? How many people? No. Okay. How many people want to vote for legalization versus decriminalization? Just kidding. Just kidding.
Well, we want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight. And we look
Thanks a lot. Enjoyed it.
forward to being with you in person at some point in the future.
I hope so, yeah.
Thank you.
Sooner rather than later.
Okay, a quick poll. How many people, I want to see hands raised, have either had one or both vaccines?
I did one.
That's why I was late to the meeting. I was getting my appointment in Broward.
Ah,
All right, so we're
Good.
at 50%. It tends to be the older people, I think.
I was in the
That's because they're the
Johnson
only
and
ones
Johnson.
authorized.
I've been in the Johnson and Johnson second trial. So I've had 2 shots, but I'm not sure if I'm placebo or not.
Oh,
Although my reaction to the first shot was so severe, I felt great afterwards. I'll find out at the end of March. And the deal is that if I was a placebo, those of us would be moved up to get the shots right away.
Cool.
By the way, I
good.
found, well, I'm changing the subject back to the voting rights of returning citizens. I have what DeSantis has said, if anyone, I should
Yeah,
read
go
it or
ahead.
not.
Please read.
Okay, a new clemency rules create an automatic pathway to restore felons' right to serve on a jury and hold public office as long as they qualify for voting rights restoration under Amendment 4. Quote, "It makes sense to also restore other civil rights," said Governor Ron Sentence.
It does?
As with automatic restoration of voting rights, felons will still need to complete all terms of their sentence, including payment of fines, fees, and restitution to qualify for automatic restoration of the right to serve on a jury or hold office. But I want to remind you too that when Desmond Meade, not very long ago, appeared before the Clemency Board to see if
Right.
he could get the restoration of all of his civil rights, DeSantis refused it. There was a dishonest, dishonorary, sorry, I'm so tired, discharge from the Army years ago, but there was a good reason for it, but the person who can provide it had passed away. So DeSantis said, no, you're not going to get your rights, all your rights back right now. You know, and he's the face of the voting rights restoration. Talks out of both sides of his mouth.
Okay.
okay. Well, thank you, everyone, and especially Mark and Lenny. And
Did anyone change their minds? Result of it.
I didn't know.
Did you have a poll?
No.
Did I interfere on a poll, a straw poll?
Sure.
Decriminalize
that?
is what?
Are you gonna have that poll, Dave?
You want me to do it? Okay, hang on, let me see.
Yeah.
Let's quickly get this together. It's tough to do when you, hang on. It doesn't seem like you can just. No, I'm not gonna be able to do this quickly.
Okay, well, can we
Well, if
raise
we don't
hands
have
or
that many
no?
people, we can just simply erase her.
Yeah, but someone's got to count, all of the people have to be available on the same screen to count, right?
We're all on the same screen.
They are.
Oh, I can't see everybody though.
I'm in favor of legalization of drugs, basically. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yes, I am too.
I am too.
All right, we got a couple. Well, at least 5. We may have a quorum.
I oppose.
Okay.
Only marijuana should be legal.
Uh,
I just wanted to say that the ACLU's position is really Dave's position, which is that the use of drugs is an issue of our autonomy and freedom from government regulation of things that are that could be, and Lenny might disagree with this, but could be victimless in the sense that we're the major victims. Should there be any victimization? So we should have autonomy over our lives in this regard.
Freedom. Okay.
Autonomy to not wear masks if we so choose.
Well,
That impacts other
well,
people.
that's an interesting, different way to approach it, Lenny. Whether use of drugs is a public health issue or not.
That's the horrors. That's the horrors argument. Then
the
people,
parade of horribles.
then people can get away without wearing masks. But no, my drug use doesn't directly affect anyone else. Not
Well,
wearing
it could, but it's not on the same scale as a failure to wear a mask and go in bars and, you know, accelerate the spread.
That was an interesting thought there. Doing drugs is more likely to lower inhibitions and cause people to go around without masks on and infect other people. But I mean, that's why it happens in bars, is because people drink and become sociable.
Mhm.
So yes. So Lenny has an argument there.
So thank you all again for this opportunity.
All right. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. We enjoyed it.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Don't forget,
Thank you.
put your seat on the back table. Soon, seriously soon. 5, 4, 3, 2.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Mary. I'll talk to you later.